Hello guys and welcome back to our blog application series. In the last episode you should have learned how to create the first one of the 4 CRUD operation, so you should have learned how to pass image data from client to server and how to store this data inside a JSON object. If you missed the last episode and you don't know how to do these things, well, just go ahead and watch the last episode. You can find the link in the description below. In this episode we will create the read feature of the CRUD operation and also our search bar. As we did in the last episode, we start building from the front end. As you can see from our complete application, we want to display all our blog posts on our home page and also be able to read them when we click on them, like so. Okay, so we can achieve this result by making a GET request that fetch our blog post data from our server and make us able to manipulate them on our client. We have to open our Index.html file and we have to write all the HTML markup we need to build this feature. So let's go in our actual application. Let's open our Index.html file. We have to get rid of this H1 and here we can start to add all the HTML markup we need. So now we can try to reload the page to see what we have just created inside the index.html file. So here, if we click on this button, we open the interface we've created in the last episode, as you can see here. Okay, at the moment our server is not able to handle a GET request on our post path, so let's try to build it together. Let's jump in our index.js file and start to create a new function. Okay, this is our post function. We have to create a new GET function, so here we can say index.blogpost.get. We want an async function and we want to pass as well our data. Okay, here we have to use a try catch block as well. The first thing that we want to build is the default behavior with which our server responds to a generic GET request. In this case, we want that our server will give back a list containing all the file names inside our post folder. We can start building a post list by using a list function on our data object. So here we can say and here we want to pass the folder name. Okay, this function does not exist yet, so let's try to build it together. Let's go in our data.js file. Let's create a list function. Here we want to pass only the directory name and we want to wrap all inside a try catch block. Okay, we can start to grab the file data using the readir method. So here we can say let file data is equal to await fs promises readir. Okay, and here we want to pass our base dir string. We want to pass our dir name. We want to pass a /. Okay, in this way. Now we have only to check if the file data variable exists and if its length is greater than 0. So here we can say okay, otherwise we want to return false. So here we want to return false. Okay, if all these conditions are true, we can initialize an empty array that we can call file list. And we can push inside this array through a for each loop all the file names that we gather from the folder. So here we can say a function, and for each file name we want that our file list, we want to push inside our file list our file name, but we want only the file name, so we have to remove the file extension using the replace method. So here we want to replace the extension .json using the replace method. Okay. In this way we will obtain an array that contains all the post ID. The last thing that we have to do is to return our file list. Okay, let's save our data.js file and let's go back in our enders.js file. The only things that we have to check here is that our post list variable exists, otherwise we want to give back a 404 error. So here if that condition is verified, we can return the post list and a 200 status code. So here we can return status code of 200 and payload of file data. Now, if we go on our browser, we can start to build a function that allows us to display all the blog posts on our home page, and at the same time we can check that all is working okay by logging out on our console the server response to a generic GET request on our post path. So here we can start to build our function. So here we can say app.onPost is equal to an async function. Okay, and here we can make the client request. So here we can say let server response is equal to await app.client.request, and here we want to pass undefined. We want to pass our path that is our posts. We want to pass the method that is get, and we want to pass undefined query string object and an undefined payload. In this way we are making a generic GET request without specifying any kind of variable. So here we can try to console log our server response. Before to reload the page, in order to console log our server response, we have to initialize this function. So if window location.pathname is equal to our root folder, so here / and here we can initialize our function app.onPost. Now, in order to display in our console our server response, we have to restart our Node.js server. So here we can say node Index.js. We have to refresh this page, and if we go on our console here, as you can see here, our server gives us back an array containing the posts we have inside our post folder, here and here. Let's go back in our enders.js file and continue building our function. So here we have to go in our enders.js file. Let's close this tab. Okay. To grab the post data inside the JSON file, we have to grab the post ID from the query string object. In the last episode, we saw how we can easily include a query string object from our client interface. So now we must perform all the necessary checks on the ID input using the ternary operator. Before we do that, we have to make some change at our endless.blogpost.get function. As we said before, this is the default behavior, and we want that this code run only when we have an empty query string object. So here we have to make an if condition that check when our query string object is empty. So here we can say if object dot keys, and here we want to pass our data dot query string object dot length is equal to 0. Then we want to run this code. Otherwise, we want to run some other code. So now we can start to perform all the checks on our ID variable. So after that, we have to check if the ID exists. So if ID. So now if this condition is true, we want to read our post.json data using the read function of the data object, and we want to pass the folder and the post ID. So here we can say let post data is equal to await data.read, and here we want to pass the post folder and our ID. This function does not exist yet, so let's go to build it together. And here we can start to say lib.read is equal to an async function. And here we want to pass our directory and our file ID. So here we can continue wrapping all the content inside a try catch block. Okay, so now we have to grab the file content by using the read file method of the fs promises module. So here we can say let file data is equal to await fs promises dot read file, and here we want to pass our base.dir string lib.base.dir string. We want to pass our directory, we want to pass a /, and we want to pass our file name, and we want to pass the JSON extension. As the second argument, we have to pass the encoding type, so here we have the UTF-8 encoding type. Okay, now if this file data exists, we want to continue to run our code, otherwise we want to give back a false. If this condition is true, you must know that the read file method of the fs promises return a string, so we have to parse this string into a JSON object. So we can use our helpers.parseJSON to object function. So here we can say let parsed data is equal to our helpers dot pass JSON to object, and here we want to pass our file data. Okay, and we want to return our parsed data. Okay, so now that we are able to grab the data inside our JSON files, we can save our data.js file, and we can go back in our endless.js file, and we can continue to build our function. So here we have only to check if our post data exists. So here we can say if post data exists, we want to continue, otherwise we want to give back a 404 error. So here return, we want to return an object, status code. We want a 404 status code, and we want to pass a payload, we want to pass an object, and this object will be an error, and we can say no user found with that ID. Okay, and if our post data variable is true, we can return a 200 status code, and we can return as payload our post data variable. Okay, let's save our index.js file and we can try to test out our new function. So let's try to make a request on our server by using our app.client.request interface by passing a post ID through a query string object. So let's try to build a query string object. Here we can say let query string object is equal to, we want to pass an ID. Let's grab an ID from our database. So we want this post ID. Let's copy this ID. Let's paste it inside our query string object. Let's try to pass our query string object. Let's save our app.js file. Let's refresh our Node.js server, and if we reload the page and we go on our inspect tool on our console, we get back an error. Okay, let's try to understand why. Okay, we get this error because of this, because when we go to create a new post, the length of our file name is 19 instead of 20. So let's correct this. Okay, let's save our helpers.createRandomString function. Okay, we can save our helpers.js file. We can restart our Node.js server. Okay, and now we can try to create a new post here. So blog post title, some random title here, some random content. Here we can pass Java, JavaScript, and blog. We can insert the reading minutes, and we can upload a new image here. So let's upload the HTML logo, for example. Okay, let's publish our blog post, and as you can see here, we have a new post. Let's try to grab this ID, and let's try to pass this ID inside our app.js function, inside our query string object. Okay, let's save our app.js file, and we can try to refresh. And as you can see, finally we have an object with all the necessary information we need to manipulate them from our client. We have exactly the same things we have in our database here. So now that we know that our function is working okay, we can go back in our index.js file to build the next feature, because we want to perform a search inside our search bar. To make our search bar work properly, we have to make our server able to do the research. So in our get function, we have to add another if condition. We want that our server give us back a list containing all the post name which is present at least in the title or in the post hashtag, the keyword we are looking for. Before we do that, we have to perform all the necessary checks on our keyword variable using the ternary operator. So here we can say let. Now we have to check if our keyword variable exists. So if keyword, okay. after we have checked that the keyword variable exists, we want to take a data list of all the posts inside the post folder, and we want to check if the list data exists as well. So here we can say let list data is equal to await data dot list, and we want to specify the post list. Now we have to check if this list data exists, so list data exists. If this list data exists, we want to continue on our code, otherwise we want to give back an error, and we can say, for example, return, and we want to return a status code of 44, and we want to return a payload which contain an error object. Here we can say no post found, okay? But if this list data exists, we want to initialize two arrays where we will store all the post data object and all the post ID that match with our keyword. So here we can say let all post objects is equal to an empty array, and let result ID is equal to an empty array. After that, through a for loop, we want to push inside our all post object array all the post object inside our JSON files. So here we can say for let it is equal to 0 and e is smaller than our list data.length and e++. So now we want to read inside each one of the files we have in our post folder. So here we can say let post data is equal to await data.read. So here we want to pass our post folder and we want to pass all the post IDs. So here we can say list data I, okay, and we want to push all this post data inside our all post object. But before we do that, we need to check if post data exists. So here we can say if post data, okay, and now we can push inside our all post object dot push, and we want to push our post data, okay. In short, here we want to obtain an array of objects. After that, we want to be sure that the pushing process is complete. So here we have to check if the all post object length is equal to our list data length. So here we have to make another if condition. So all post object dot length is equal to list data dot length. If this condition is true, we want to start another for loop. So here we can say for let j is equal to 0 and j is smaller than all post object dot length and j++. Okay, so now we want that our server perform the real research inside our post object. So here we have to make an if condition that checks if our keyword is present in our post title or in our post hashtag arrays. So here we can say if all post object j dot title dot index of, and here we want to pass our keyword dot to locale lowercase, and we want to check if this thing is greater than -1. which is equal to say we want to check if this keyword is present in the post title. We want to use the toLocale lowercase method because we want to match the keyword even if the user will insert an uppercase keyword. And we want to check also that our all post object j.tag.indexOf. And here we want to pass our keyword, this as well as in the last block. So here we can say toLocale lowercase, and as well here we want to check if this is greater than -1. If all these two conditions are true, we want to push that object inside our result ID array. So here we can say result ID dot push, and we can say all post object j.id. In this way we will obtain an array with all the post ID containing the keyword we are looking for. Now we have only to check if our result ID array length is greater than 0. So if result ID dot length is greater than 0, this is equally to say that we have some results, okay? But if we have no result inside our result ID array, we can return a 404, and we can say status code is equal to 404 and payload is equal to an error, and here we can say no post found for that keyword, okay? Otherwise, if this condition is true, we want to return a status code of 200, and we want to return as payload our result ID array. So let's save our address.js file and let's try to pass inside our app.js file a query string object containing a keyword. So here we can say keyword, and we can try to pass a keyword that we know that is present inside some of our post titles. So here, for example, we can pass the keyword random. Here we can take this keyword and we can pass this keyword inside our query string object. Okay, let's save our app.js file. Let's reload our Node.js server, so node index.js, and let's reload our blog application. Let's go in our console, and as you can see here, our server gives back to us an array with an ID, and if we go on our database, we can see that is the ID where we have the random keyword. Let's try to do another example with the other post. Here we can insert the word DSA, for example, and let's insert this word inside this array. Let's save it, let's refresh this page, and as you can see here we have the other post. It seems that all is working okay. Now we can start to build on our app.js file the feature that allows us to display on our browser all the blog posts, and to display on our browser the blog posts that contains the keyword we are looking for. And let's go in our app.js file. So basically at this point we have only to build the client function that will handle our new feature. We know that when we make a generic GET request, our server gives back an array containing all the posts inside our database. So let's create an async function here, and we want to pass inside this function our server response. So here we can say app.showPost is equal to an async function, and we want to pass the server result, the server response. Here we can say results, and first of all we want to grab those results, so we can say server response is equal to result. Okay, results, sorry. First of all, we want to check that our server does not give us back an error. So if there are any, we want to display them. In order to achieve this result, we have to create a div with class message in our index.html file. So here we can say div with class message. Now we can go back in our app.js file and we can grab this div with our query selector method. So here we can say let message is equal to document dot query selector, and here we want to pass our message class. And as we said before, we want to display the error if there are any. So here we can check if our server gives us back an error simply by checking if in the server response there is an error object. Because in our enders.js file we have this payload with this key that is error, okay? So here we can simply check these things by using an if condition. So here we can say if server response dot error exists, okay? We want to select all our tutorials card. So here let all card is equal to document query selector all, and we want to pass our tutorials card here. And through a for each loop, we want to remove them from our index.html file. So here we can say let e equal to 0, e smaller than all card.length, and e++. And here we have to use the remove method. So all card dot I dot remove method, okay? After we do that, we have to display the message. So here we can say message dot inner text is equal to server response dot error, okay? So here we can save our app.js file, we can save our index.html file, and we can continue. So here, if we don't have errors, we can start to building the code that will display our posts on our browser. First of all, we have to remove all the posts from our client interface, because for example, every time that we want to perform a research by hitting the search button, we want to get rid of all the posts inside our HTML template, and we want to make room for the search result. After that, through a for loop, we have to grab all the results from our server response and make a client request. So we can achieve this by setting up here an else condition, and here we can take this piece of code and we can pass it here, because as well as the first block here, we want to remove all the posts inside our HTML template before attempting a new research. Okay, after that, through a for loop, we have to grab all the results from our server response and make a client request and pass through a query string object every file name that we have in that array. So here we can say for let j is equal to 0, j is smaller than server response dot length, and j++. So here we have to build our query string object. We want to pass our ID and we want to grab those ID from our server response. So here server response j, okay. And after that, we want to take all the single post data by making a client request by using our app.client.request interface. So here we can say let single post data is equal to await app.client.request, And here we want to pass undefined because we don't have headers. We want to pass our path, that is post. We want to pass the method, that is get. We want to pass our query string object. Okay, and we want to pass undefined because we don't have payload. In this way, we can manipulate every single post data object in order to display the information we need on our browser. So now we have to create all the elements we need and we have to append them to our Index.html file. And we can achieve this goal by using our tutorials container div as a hooks where we can spawn all our blog posts. So let's continue. Let's correct this typo here, and here we can continue. Here we are doing nothing else than using the create element method to create all the elements we need in order to display on our browser all the post data and append them through the append child method to our hooks container. Okay, as you can see here, we are doing nothing else than building the layout that will make our user able to interact with our application. Here we have the link that we will use when we build the next feature that will make us able to read our posts. Here we are creating the link for our post image, and we are doing nothing special here. We are only trying to display our server data on our browser. So now, before we go ahead and we try to display our blog posts on our application, our browser, we have to go here inside our own post image and we have to update this. We want to pass our server response inside our show post function. So here we can say server response. And we don't want to pass any query string object because we want to display all the blog posts we have in our database. So here we can pass undefined, okay. And now we can save our app.js file, but before we can refresh the page, we have to go in our server.js file and we have to update this part of code because our server is not able to understand the PNG content type. So here we can grab this piece of code, we can copy and we can paste it here, and we have to update this part, and we can say here image PNG. So now let's save our terminal, let's update our Node.js server, so CLS node index.js. And if we refresh the page, as you can see here, we have our post image, we have our information, we have our tags, we have our reading minutes, our title, and so on. So now, in order to make this feature available also for our search bar, we have to go in our app.js file and we have to build another function here. So in this moment, if we type something, and we hit the search button, as you can see, our browser refreshed the page, but nothing has happened. So we have to build this feature here, and we can say app.searchbar is equal to an async function. And here as well, we have to use a try catch block. So here we can write console.error e, and inside here we have to grab our form, our search form. So here we can say post search form is equal to document dot query selector, and we want to pass our form ID, so search form. After that, we want to add an event listener. So here post search form dot add event listener. We want that this event will listen for the submit event. And here we want to create an async function as well. We want to pass an event because we want to use the event prevent default method. After that, we want to take the keyword that the user will insert in our search bar using the form data API. So here we can say let form data is equal to new form data, and here we want to pass the event and the target property. Now we have to point at the name of our input in order to take the data that the user will type inside of it. So here we can say let keyword is equal to form data dot get, and here we want to pass the keyword name. And now we have only to build our query string object. So here we can say let query string object is equal to keyword, and here we want to pass our keyword. Okay. And as final step, we have to make our client request. So here we can say let server response is equal to app.client.request, and here we want to pass undefined, we want to pass our post path, we want to pass the get method, we want to pass our query string object, and we don't have any payload, so here we want to pass undefined, and we want that this array of result will pass through our showPost function. So here we can say app.showPost, and here we want to pass our server response. Okay, now in order to make our search bar work properly, we have to initialize our function, so app.searchbar here, and we have also to add here the keyword await because we are working with promises. Okay, and now if we refresh our browser here and we try to type some keyword, let's say random, as you can see our server gives back us the post that contain the random keyword. If we refresh the page, we obtain back all the posts we have inside our database. If we try to type, I don't know, DASD, for example, DASD, as you can see here, we have only this post, but at the moment we are not able to read inside our blog post because we have not already built this feature. So we can go ahead and build this feature as well. Before we continue building the last feature of this episode, I want to do a premise. Until now, every time we want to grab some data from our server, we have always make a request from our app.client.request interface. For this feature, I want to show an alternative method with which we can achieve the same results. I'm talking about server-side rendering. We will serve the data into our page directly from our computer memory. We want that our users can read the blog post through the read path, but as may you know, create a new route is a 3-step process. We have to create our HTML template, we have to add the path to our router object, and we have to create the endr function. So let's start to create our new HTML template. So here, let's go in our template folder, and we have to create a new file, and we can say post read.html, and here we can start to type all the HTML markup. As you can see, we have a lot of empty tags where we want to display our server information. Here we have the title, here we have the reading minutes, here we have the tag container, here we have the main content, and so on. Now we have to go in our server.js file to create the route on our router object. So here we can go here, and in our server.router object we can say read, and we want to pass enders.read. Okay, let's save our server.js file and let's go in our enders.js file. So here we can start to build our new function, and we can say enders.read is equal to an async function, and we want to pass here our data as well. As usual, we have to wrap all inside a try-catch block. Okay, now we can try to console log our data in order to see if all is working okay. So here we can save, we can open our Node.js server, we can restart our Node.js server, and if we go on the read path here, as you can see, we get back an empty object, and here we received our client data. So it seems that all is working okay. Now we have only to build the new feature. So how we can serve the post data directly from our server without making a client request? If you remember, in the first episode, we have built a function that allows us to pass a template data object into our HTML template, and we have called this function interpolate. So if we go in our helpers.js file, here you can see that we have this function here. This function allows us to pass an object into our HTML template. So in order to achieve our goal, we have to grab the ID from the URL and make our server give back to us the post data for that specific ID. But how do we do that? The answer is inside our app.js file. If we go in our app.js file, when we have built our post template, as you can see here, we have built also a query string object that allows us to send to our server the ID of every single post. So now that we know how to build this feature, let's go in our index.js file and let's go to build it. Okay, let's get rid of this. So here, as usual, we have to perform all the necessary checks on our ID string. But before we do that, we have to allow only get method requests. So here we can say if data.method is equal to get, then we can continue. Otherwise, we can return an error, and we can say status code of 500. And here we want to pass a payload as well, and we want to pass an error, and here we can say only get method are allowed. Okay, so if the data method is equal to get, we can perform all the necessary checks on our ID string. So here we can say let ID is equal to. So now we can start to grab the data inside our JSON files using the read method of the data object. So here we can say let post data is equal to await data dot read, and here we want to pass our post folder and the ID that we grab from the query string object. After that, we want to check if post data exists. If post data exists, we want to continue with our code. Otherwise, we want to return an error, and we want to return a status code of 404, and we want to return a payload, which is an object where we want to pass an error, and here we can say no post found with that ID. Okay, but if post data exists, we want to build our template data object. So here we can say let template data is equal to an object. Let's close this tab in order to make you see better. Okay, so let's start to build our object. We want to pass the ID. We want to pass the same ID that we have in our query string object. We want to take the title, which is our post data dot title. We want to take the main content, which is our post data dot main content, and we can continue like this. So now we can grab the template of our post_read.html template by using our getTemplate method. So here we can say let post template is equal to await helpers dot get template, and here we want to pass our post read template. We want to pass as well our template data. Now we have only to check if post template exists. So if post template, we can continue, otherwise we can return an error. So we can just copy this and we can paste it here, and we can say not able to read the template. Okay, but if post template exists, we can merge the footer and the header with the body of our template. So here we can say let total string is equal to await helpers add header and footer, and here we want to pass our post template data as well our template data. Okay, now if total string exists, we can continue with our code. Otherwise we want to return an error, so let's copy this and let's paste it here, and we can say not able to merging the strings. Okay, but if total strings exist, we want to return an object with status code of 200, a payload where we can pass our total string, and a content type equal to HTML. Okay, let's save our index.js file and let's try to reload our server. Okay, node index.js, and if we go on our links, and as you can see here, we have our page, but we are not able to see any information inside our template because we have to insert this key inside our post read template. So let's go in our post read template and let's try to insert, for example, here the title. If you remember, in our helpers.js file we have built a function that we have called interpolate. Basically this function looks for the keyword stored inside the curly brackets in our HTML template and replace this keyword with the value in our template data object. Here, for example, we can go here and we can start to say here title. If we save and we refresh the page, as you can see here, we have the title. And we can go ahead by update all the template. As you can see here, we have all the information we need. We are not able at the moment to see the image, and this is because we have to pass inside the data link object our file name and our file extension in order to grab it from our app.js file and make the actual link. So here we can say data.link is equal to file name dot file extension. So now if we save this template and we refresh the page, as you can see here, we are not able to see the image as well because we have to go in our app.js file and we have to build a new function, a very short one, that will make us able to see the image in our read template. So here we can say app.readPost we want an async function. Okay, and here we want to say let main image. We want to grab the main image from our template using the document query selector method. Here we want to take our main image class. After that, we want to take the heading container by using as well the query selector method. So here we can say heading container, and we want to select this container by using the query selector method. We have to type the class here, and now we have only to take the data link string from our heading container and put it on our image through the src method. So here we can say main image dot src is equal to heading container dot dataset dot link. Okay, now we have to initialize this function here. So if window dot location dot pathname is equal to read, we want to pass our app dot read post function. So if we save this app.js file and we refresh the page, okay, we don't see the image as well. Let's find out why. Okay, the reason is this one, because our data links has to be in our heading container, not into our image. So here we have to update this template. Let's save, let's refresh, and as you can see here, we have our HTML image, HTML logo. If we go back and if we try to click inside this post as well, we have the image. And that's all for this episode, guys. In the next episode, we will try to build the update feature. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please consider to subscribe into my channel and leave a like to support more content like this. See you in the next one, guys.